Hey guys, Byron here, aka Slay Beast, and today we have got a fun one for you. We are going to be jumping into Houdini. Now, I know, a lot of you watching this might be rolling your eyes because you're probably thinking we're going to be doing a bunch of Vex coding and dealing with a bunch of, no, none of that stuff, okay? We're staying away from the deep end of the pool right now. The goal of this video is simple, okay? I want this to be very simple for you guys to jump in and understand, okay? I learn best by doing. I can hear a bunch of stuff and it goes in one ear, out the other. Now I do explain a few things in the beginning, but it's because these are things that need to be explained. The goal of this video is for you to be able to jump into Houdini, feel confident enough to create something from start to finish, kick it out, export it to Cinema 4D or Blender or Maya, whatever you're using, and then render out from those programs. So Houdini, we are looking at it as a tool. I'm looking at it through the lens of Cinema 4D, and so that's how I'm approaching it. I'm not approaching it as someone who has a huge coding background or anything like that. I'm looking at it as an artist, right? And so that's my goal in this, is for you to be able to feel confident in jumping into Houdini and seeing the benefits of using this tool in your projects. Because I can tell you right now, using Houdini over the past couple years or so in production, professionally, and in my personal projects, I can tell you and attest to the fact that it is a game changer. There's so many, it opens up a whole new world, and I want you guys to be able to experience that. So without further ado, we are gonna go ahead and jump on in and tell you what, this is your first day in Houdini. Let's go.
All right, so before we dive too deep here, I just want to show you what we're going to be creating today in Houdini. Now, I'm not going to be covering the rendering and texturing portion of this. I rendered this out of Cinema 4D and textured it in there as well. So it's the same techniques I'm going to be showing you. It's just an idea of what you can create given what we're going to be covering today. So let's go ahead and jump on in. So if you hit tab, this is going to be your main work area over here. And Houdini is a node-based system. So if you go over here and you hit, it says empty network, press tab to add objects. Pretty simple, right? So you hit tab, and these are all the things that you can add into the scene. Now, something to note is context. Now, I'm not going to, again, dive too much into that. I'll cover that in another video. But these up here, if you just click up here, these, if you hear anybody talk about context or you hear me mention context in this video or others, this is what I'm talking about. You've probably heard all and seen all the memes about the chops, the vops, shops, all that stuff. There are different contexts. The only ones that we really need to be concerned about in this video is this one right here. I'm sorry, this one right here, object, the one that we're in. This object context, okay? What that basically means is this is the, think of it as a shell that you're working in. If you're inside of a house and you want to work on the car, you go to the garage, right? So essentially, this is the house right here. This object context is the main context that we're going to be working in. So if I add a geometry container, there's nothing in this. This is empty, okay? Think of this as a bedroom in a house. If I add something like a light, we go to redshift light, I add the light, right? So we have our light. And then this, if I hit control click up here on your shelf tools, on your main lights and camera shelf tools, we'll go over this again in another video. But for now, if you control and then left click on the camera, it will create a camera based on the view that you are in, okay? And as you see, it automatically created this camera here for us. So what this red portion means is that if I move, that camera is locked. If you see this little lock icon, this camera is locked to my view. So the camera will move with the view. If I unlock that and I move around, you can see now I'm out of the camera mode, and we can see our camera here. So pretty simple stuff, pretty basic, right? So this is your main area, the main stage context that you'll be working in most of the time. Okay. Now I'll show you what I mean. If right in here, I created a light and I created a camera. Okay. So if I hit tab, I can go to cameras, create a camera. I can go to lights. I'll just go down here because I use redshift inside of Houdini. If I go to redshift, I can create a redshift light. But if I go into this bedroom, so to speak, this context, we are now in the geometry level. Okay, so we're in a different level within the context here. Okay, we're in the object context, but we're down one level, so to speak. So if I'm in this bedroom, I can't access things in the other bedroom. So if I hit tab, you'll notice it's a whole new set of items here. I can't get a camera. I don't have access to lights because that's not what you're doing in this context. So just something to be aware of as we're working through this. To go up one level, and you can see right up here, I think of it like a file browser in a sense, right? To go up one level, you can just hit U, and that brings you back to the main context. To go into a geometry node, or if there's a dot network, which is a dynamic operator, you would just double click, go in here, and then you go in here. This is also called the SOP level. Okay, surface operator is what SOP stands for. So if you hear anybody mention SOP, this is what they're talking about. Okay, I know that was a lot to throw at you, but I just kind of wanted to get that out there. All right, so let's delete this light and this camera because we don't need that. So this empty geometry container, I'm going to name this RBD sim. Okay. Actually, I'll just do it all lowercase. Just keep it simple. RBD sim. All right. So this is going to house our main simulation. Okay. So if we dive in here, I'm going to double click. Dive in here, I'm going to hit tab, and I'm going to create a cube. And there we have a cube. All right. We're just going to leave this everything set the way it is right now. Okay. But in here, in the parameters, you can see the different parameters that this box has. Now, if yours looks a little different, yours probably looks like this. Unlock that. Yours probably looks like this. Okay. I prefer to have the floating window. So I just collapse this down here. I can pull it out if I need to, but I usually collapse that and I hit P to bring up the parameters in a floating menu because I can scale this and adjust it however I need to. That's just how I prefer to work. If you want to work different, then by all means set it up however you want to set it up. So with our box selected, what we're going to do is we're going to create an item here that we can use for our rigid body dynamic simulation, okay, for RBD sim. So what we're going to do with this box selected, if I hit tab, and again, this is node based, and the way that it works, the way that Houdini works is it works from top to bottom, okay? So if I hit tab again, I'm going to add what's called a match size, okay? If you hit shift with this selected, if you hit shift enter, it'll automatically connect it to the previous node. All right, just a little trick there for you, little tips. It's going to be a huge time saver because otherwise, if I have this selected, I hit tab, I say match size, type in match size, go down, I hit enter, then I have to place it, then I have to connect it, and then I have to flag and make this the visible object. Now that's something else to note. These flags on the nodes, just a super quick overview. These flags, this blue one is what you are viewing and what you're currently viewing. The purple, I'll show you that real quick. If I create a sphere and I go to the sphere, you see how over here the cube disappears and I go to the box. You're only viewing what you have, the flag that you have selected on the object. But the second to the right, this flag here, if I hit that, that's the template flag. So just something to note here though, on these flags, you want to have the blue flag set to the node that you want to view, okay? If I wanted to see this, a representation of where this other object was, or let's say I had another node stream over here that I wanted to view, I could hit this template flag, and that would show me, you can't see it right now because I have this in the way here, this box is in the way. So I have the template, the sphere set to template. If I did the opposite, and I had the sphere selected, but the box set to template, I would now see the box here, okay? So just something to note. These other two, the lock and the bypass, you don't really need to know. The bypass literally just disables a node. So if I turn off that template and I do let's just do a match size. Okay, all the bypass does is if you select a node and you hit B to bypass, you can click that, or you can hit bypass. It literally just disables it so that it doesn't read it and it defaults to the previous node. So you're not actually seeing what this is. Okay, so all that to say, that's just a quick overview of the flags on each of the nodes. So with our box selected, what we're going to do on this match size, and actually I need to reset my box here to 0, double click, 0. And if you ever want to reset anything to default, if I right click on it, say revert to defaults, you see right here, it says control middle mouse button can do that. So I usually, if I want to reset, I just hover over this, I hit control middle mouse, boom, we're back to 0, back to whatever the default is. Okay. Okay. So we have our match size here. And what this does is I can choose this box here, and I can make this box either be even to the grid by the top of the object or by the bottom of the object, or center, aligned by the center. So what I mean is, if I select this and I go over here to justify Y and I change this to minimum, we now have a box that is flush with the ground, right? The ground plane, the work plane here. So the reason why I do that instead of just moving it up is because if I added a sphere into here and I connect the sphere is now flush with the ground. So that is one of the benefits of having a node-based procedural system with Houdini. This is the probably the simplest example here that I can show you, but this is just the power of Houdini, is that if you have, let's say I have a huge node stream here, and it's all based on this box, right? And the client says, well, actually, we want to change that to a sphere, or your CD or AD says, hey, I want to, creative director, art director says, hey, I want to, let's try a version where we just do a sphere. You don't have to rebuild everything. All you literally have to do is just make a sphere, connect it, and everything downstream will update. So that's just awesome. I love it. All right. So, with that selected, the match size, what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale up, and this is another reason why I do the match size. I'm going to scale this up. If a middle mouse button over any of these options here, you can go up and down to get more fine or greater control of your values. But I'm going to scale this up by 3, okay? Or you could just type in 3. And you can see as I do that, it actually updates because it's taking this match size into consideration, right? So you don't have to worry about like going to this box and saying, oh, okay, well, I need to scale it up, but then I need to move this up here and match it and eyeball it and, you know, do math and nah, forget that. You don't have to worry about that. Not with Houdini. So in here, you just set it and forget it, right? So I found that for what we're going to be doing, value of 3 is a good size, okay? So the next thing that we're going to do is, and this is where we start to get into the sim, okay? So we've got our box, we've got our match size set up. Now what we're going to do is we are going to add what's called it's our very first dynamic node dealing with our dynamics sim. It's called an RBD material fracture. Again, hit Shift Enter, and it will automatically connect it to this. Now it takes a second. Oh, I had that selected. That's why it connected to it. It takes it a second because what it's doing, if you've ever used Voronoi fracture or otherwise, it's creating, as you can see here, these broken up pieces so that you can already have this Voronoi fracture type system inside of your object, or broken apart from your object. So with that selected, and what I'm actually going to do right now, I'm going to hit Shift S, and you'll see these lines change here. This is just an organizational thing. It's different ways to view these connections. I prefer this way. It just seems a lot more cleaner to me. I can organize things a little better. So so that's what that is. Shift S, it'll change your connection type. So I want to flag this to come down so we can view this here. Now, what this is doing, I will add it's called an RBD exploded view. Okay, shift enter on that, and you can see it connects all of these pieces. Okay, so this is just a view node, and all you're doing with this is literally it's just to preview what your fractures are looking like. Okay, so if you look at these dots here, when I hover over dot, if you look down here, it'll tell me exactly what that connector is for. Okay, so if I hover over this, that's the geometry input. Okay, so we've input our geometry. This is our constraint geometry. We'll get to that in just a little bit. This one is our proxy geometry. We don't need to worry about that right now. And this is extra Voronoi points. This is something really cool, but we'll cover this later in another video. So these points here are mostly dealing, once we go downstream from here, from this initial node, we see that we have our geometry node, our constraint geometry, which is usually always the pink one, and then this is our proxy geometry. Okay, so the proxy geometry is just going to create a geometry, a very simplified version of the geometry that it's using to actually calculate the simulation, which is going to help speed up simulation times, cache times, all that stuff. So that's what that's why it has 3 connectors. So I'm purely viewing this right now. Okay, this isn't something that we use to actually render with. And if you see there, I shook the node. If you shake a node, you can just take it out of the stream. If I wanted to add this in, let's say I got down here to my RBD fracture and I realized, oh man, I want to put this on the ground. I just have to hover over this, boom, connects it, and you're good to go. Okay, so just another thing to keep in mind as far as navigating the node view. So I'm going to connect these, and I can hit shift and select those and just click the first one. Oh, my bad. If I hold down Y, it'll disconnect those. Hit shift, gather those, and if you go down and connect to the first one, it'll automatically connect to the other 3. Okay. So if I flag this, and you see I had that error, that's just because there wasn't anything connected to it. When I go into these settings, okay, so we have our view, exploded view, our flag set to our exploded view so we can see what's happening on there. And I can change in the parameters here how much I want to see this viewport or see the exploded view. We'll just set that on 1. If I go into this material fracture, what we have here is a very, very robust system that's set up by Side Effects, and this is a fairly new node, I think within the last few years. It might be longer than that, but this is great for simulations because what this is going to do is, you can see here I have this chipping tab and I have this detail tab. You can get some really, really great high production value results from just the preset options that they have here. And if you see up here as material type, I have concrete, glass, wood, and custom. So you can change these to different things depending on what you're trying to achieve. If I change this to wood, watch what happens over here on the left. It's calculating down here. You can see that it has, it's telling you exactly what it's doing in the system down here. So now it has wood. So it's created, taken my box, and it's created a system that breaks it up based on the properties of wood. You can do the same thing with glass. So it's really cool. And you can create your own custom one as well. So I'll stick with concrete for now. We'll go back to concrete. And I want to add some detail in here. Okay. So if I go to my material fracture, and in the properties, I go to chipping, I can enable chipping, and you'll see I get tiny, tiny little pieces here that are added to our fractured object. Take it one step further and you go into detail and you have edge detail. Now watch what happens to these edges, because right now these are really straight, right? It's not realistic. So if I go to edge detail, you'll see what happens. It breaks up the edges on our object, so it's a little more realistic. And then you can take it one step further than that and go to interior detail and add more interior detail in here. So it looks like more fractured concrete. Okay, so with just a few clicks, we've got some pretty cool detailed stuff going on here. So this is where the fun happens. All right, this is what you've been waiting for. So I'm going to set this off to the side, and I'm going to add an RBD solver. I'm going to hit Shift Enter, and we are connected. Okay. Anything that I use for viewing, essentially, I just kind of pull it over to the side. I don't need the proxy to view. I don't really need to view the proxy. I'll just label this RBDX view. Okay. So this is our actual solver here. Now, if I dive into here, you'll see there's some extra options here. Well, we don't really need to worry about that, but if you wanted to add extra turbulence or anything like that, you actually use the particle, which is the pop forces, into here, and you would apply that. As you see it here, it has listed wire pop forces into pre-solve, this node here, to apply per point forces. Okay, so you would add, if I hit tab, I've got, and I type in pop, you see how all of the options I have here to play with to be able to adjust my simulation the way I want to. But we're not going to deal with that for now. Okay, hit U to go back up. I'm just showing you that this node goes pretty deep as far as what's inside of it, and this is where all the magic happens inside of here. Okay, so I'm going to flag this, and you can see our simulation collapses again. Oh, one other thing I wanted to do is add one other level of detail to this. So if I go to my primary fracture, I want to add one extra level of detail. So right now I have, if I take away this one, you can see that, let me go to my exploded view. You can see it's only a few pieces really, but then you add, by default it comes with 2. So you add another one and it gets a little more realistic, it's broken up a little better. And then what I found is 3 is actually really good, and you can adjust. There are a lot of things you can do with these settings, but we'll leave those alone for now. I add a third level because it gives us quite a bit of detail without breaking the bank as far as our simulation times and whatnot go, at least for our example, what we're doing today. So you see we got a lot of really nice small pieces. We got some chipping pieces. We've got some bigger pieces, okay? So I'm going to go to my bullet solver. I'm going to hit it, and let's just get in here, okay? I'm going to check my animation settings down here, this little button down here. I'm going to click on it, and that brings up my global animation options. We're set at 24 frames. Our start and finish, 1 to 120, so we got about 5 seconds on there. We're good there. And I always work at 24, so you may need to work otherwise. So if you need to change that, that is where that option is. And to start the simulation, you can hit play, or what I usually do is I just hit the up arrow key on my keyboard, and that'll start our simulation. Well, you see it happening, but it's just dropping to the floor, right? So that's not what we want. To reset, I do control up arrow, or you can just hit this back button. Okay, so you can hit play, stop, back, but I usually just do up arrow, hit up arrow again, and then do control up to reset the simulation. It's falling because we don't have anything for this to collide with, right? There's nothing there. So if we go to over here in our bullet solver, hit ground, and we want to add ground plane. Now we have ground, okay? So we'll start our simulation again, and nothing happens. You may be wondering why that is. Well, this is where constraints come in. So as far as constraints go, if I go back into my material fracture, go over here to this tab called Constraints. You'll notice I have this constraint called a glue constraint. Okay, this comes standard with the material fracture because the glue is doing what? It's gluing, it's keeping everything contained and glued together within this simulation. So these numbers, these default numbers are crazy high. For what we're going to do, we don't need this at all. So we're going to just set this to 0. So that way, our primary strength is set to 0, and the chipping glue strength with those little tiny little pieces is set to 0 as well. So if we go back and we frame this up a little bit, go back to our main solver, make sure our timeline is set back to 1. If we hit up, you will now see that we have something actually happening now, which is what we want. So gravity is already automatically set in our solver. If we go to forces, you'll see that gravity is already set. I like to add a drag spin and the drag, just kind of the default values. You'll see at the bottom, when you change a setting, if this is cached, but you've changed the setting, it'll turn orange. If it's cached and you're good to go, it'll stay blue. So just something else to keep in mind. So I hit Control up, go back, and we will run this again. I'll let it run the full 120 frames. You see all these little pieces. You see, that we have everything, all these smaller pieces, these mid-size pieces. We have the interior detail, the chipping, the fracturing, the edge detail, all of that stuff with just a few nodes. So we got a really nice looking sim here. Literally just, gravity is just bringing this thing to the ground. So with that, what I want to do before we move forward, I just want to show you real quick what those glue constraints are for. If I wanted this to be a pillar, this obviously wouldn't work, okay? Because there's nothing constraining this. It's just falling apart. So, and I'm just going to set this up really quick because I'm not going to go into too much detail on exactly what I'm doing. You can just slow it down if you need to watch. I'm just going to basically create a collision object that we can have to collide with the pillar here. I'm going to set a keyframe here. Put this into our collision geometry. Down here. And we go to 24. And I will and move this up and create a key there. And then go here. And inside of here, I have to change this under collisions to deforming static object. And we will now see, also, I don't want to see this. So under visualize, I'm going to uncheck show collision because I don't really want to see my collision object. But now you'll see that we have the sphere actually hitting and interacting with the pillar. But again, this isn't what we want. This is what you would want if you're trying to have a pillar like a car is hitting it or something, right? This is where the glue constraints come in. If I go to my glue constraint and I change this to the primary strength, again, middle mass button, go back to the default values, you'll see these are going to be way too strong. So it's just going to nail this whole thing over like it's just weighs like 1,000,000 pounds. That's also not what we want. So we're going to bring this down to 100 and about 50. Okay. We're going to run it now. And now you see it's breaking apart, but that glue constraint is keeping these pieces constrained together. See all these little tiny pieces here that are chipped? It's actually gluing these objects together. So we're getting what we would expect to get from a more realistic example of this simulation, right? Of a car we're hitting the pillar or something. So that's something to keep in mind with the material, or not the material fracture, but with just the constraints in general. And you can actually view these constraints if you want to as well. And here, and if you go to your RBD view, make sure that this constraint is connected to your exploded view. And if you go over here to visualize, you can say constraint strength. And here we go back to my main view here. Here. Let me select that, sorry. Once you have constraint strength selected, you need to check show constraints, and you'll see that we actually can view in real time what those glue constraints are doing. Okay, so you see up here, you have your little graph of how strong they actually are. So you'll see if I change this to 0 and the chipping to 0, they're all white because there's nothing constraining it at all. So that's just a really easy way to view how your constraints are working. That's a bit more of a down the line thing for you, but just so you are aware of why we want to change the constraints, that's why you would want to do it. But for now, we are going to keep them at 0 because we don't really need to worry about that. And I'm going to disconnect this collision, the collision, because we're not going to use that for our example today. I just wanted to show you that as a little side note to help you understand why we would want to change the collisions. So we have our simulation here. This is exactly what we want. Now, if you notice, I want to show you something that's very important as well inside of Houdini. If I go over any of these nodes and I middle mouse click, you'll see all this information here. Okay, you've got your points, you got your primitives, vertices, polygons. We don't really need to concern ourselves with all of this right now, all of this information. But I do want to show you, because this is going to be important for our Alembic when we kick it out, I do want to show you the groups here. So this essentially is going to be our, in Cinema 4D, this is going to be our selection tags that we can use to add the materials to, and in Blender, it automatically creates materials based off of these groups, okay? But if I go to the top here and I middle click, you see we don't have any of those groups. Those groups are added at this material fracture stage, and they're carried through, okay? And that's one thing that you have to be aware of in working in Houdini is attributes. Attributes are the currency of Houdini. If I have an attribute, let's say I have a position right here, okay, this one, it's a point attribute. It's just something to be aware of as well. I won't get too much into that, but just something to keep in mind. This is a point attribute, a position point attribute. If I wanted that point attribute to follow all the way down here, say somewhere along the lines, I had to redo this mesh and had to do some other crazy stuff to get the result I wanted, but I lost the point attribute along the way, I would have to add that back in down here because it didn't follow through the chain downstream here. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, again, for now, all we really need to do, we have a position, we have our velocity, we have our name, we have our normals, and a variable. We don't really need to worry about the details necessarily, but these different attributes, the point attributes, the primitive attributes, the vertex attributes, those are very important, and also these groups. So we have our simulation set up with 4 nodes, super simple, very simple setup. And what I like to do is I like to, in order to keep, what we're going to do now is we're going to cache this out. And in order to keep the cache down on something like this in RBD Sim, what I like to do is just sim out the points themselves, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Tab, and I'm going to type File Cache. And this is what we're going to use to kick out our, now this is not what we're going to be bringing into Cinema 4D. This is what we're using to cache our simulation, so the exports to Cinema 4D will be much faster. Now, I'll show you a little trick of the trade here. If I go over, if I hover over this last point here, you'll see that down here at the bottom here, it tells me that that is the simulation point output. All we want for this is the points, because otherwise we're caching all of this geometry, and our cache is going to be much bigger. So what we only want to focus on right now is the points. So we're going to connect that to the points. And we're going to go to we're going to hover over the file cache. And you can see we only see these points here. Okay. So this is what we're going to be caching out, this versus this. All right. So if I click this right now, you see that we have 78,000 polygons, 286,000 vertices, 78,000 primitives. Okay. We don't need to cache all that information. All we need is the information from the points. And if you look here, we now only have 445 points, and our memory that will be used is 91 kilobytes versus 11 to 12 megs. Okay, so this is a super simple example, but these are things you need to be aware of when you're caching out your simulations, is that if you keep caching these out and doing iterations with these, especially if you're doing large scale sims or really high voxel simulations, tons of millions of particles, there are ways that you can keep your file size and cache size down and be able to utilize that information. So you'll see what I'm talking about here in a minute. So I'm going to hook this up to the points, and in my file cache, what I'm going to do is I change this to node name. And OS basically means the the node that you're using, it is going to use the name of this right here. Okay, so whatever I name this, that's what this is going to be. So I'm just going to name this RBD sim. Okay, and you don't have to put version numbers because Houdini added this really cool thing into the file cache system a while ago that allows for versions. So you can version up here and it'll create folders, a folder structure based on your versions, which is really cool because you can iterate and go back and see what an older version that you cached was. We're going to do frame 1 to 120. So automatically it's set to start and end. So that's what we want. We've got frame 1 to 120. That's set. This is set and it's automatically set. And I'll show you real quick. It's automatically set. This is where I have my file. It's automatically going to cache inside of the geo folder. And when we export our Limbic, it's automatically going to cache to the Alembic folder. Or actually, I think you have to set the Alembic folder, but the geometry it for sure creates by default. So BGeo is what Houdini, the language of Houdini and the cache system, this is what it uses. So that's what we want to use. And I think other than that, we are good to go. So what I want to do, and what I actually like to do, if I hit C, it'll bring up this little color palette here. I like to make that red just to let me know that it's a cache. Because if I'm looking at it, if I have a huge stream and I'm looking at it here, I can see that all the red ones are files that I have cached. All right. I actually use a separate HDA that was created by a really awesome VFX artist. It's called Cache It. You should check it out. I'll leave a link to it. It's called Cache It, and it automatically creates. It's very robust. Whenever you cache something and read it back in, it'll change colors automatically. You can check versions, clean up versions. You can see the ETA time on your cache, and it'll create intermediate directories and all that stuff. So, and you can version up in these as well, which is really cool. So, but for now, we'll use the default Houdini cache system, which is awesome. So we will have our select our cache system. We will double check our frame range. And all we got to do at this point is just hit save to disk. And you'll see, boom, done. And if I look in my file here, geometry RBD sim, that's what we named this, RBD sim, version 1. And in here we have our cache, right? So it's literally that easy. It's that simple. So we now have this cache and it automatically reads it back in, and you want to make sure this is checked, load from disk. Otherwise, you're not reading from your cached simulation. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now, you might say, okay, well, that's great, Byron, but those are just points. I don't understand. Well, like what are we? I don't understand what we're doing here. Let me show you the magic. There is a node called transform pieces, and it is for this purpose, for this exact purpose, transform pieces. If I hit enter and I put this down here, what it's going to do, it's going to take, if you look at the node input, it says require geometry to transform and require template points. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hook this up to my simulation, which is just the points, and I'm going to hook this up to my fractured geometry. Because what it's going to do, it's going to take this geometry and it's going to read into this cache and apply that geometry to this cache. So essentially you have a cached system without having to cache the entire geometry. Okay, it's a little workaround, little trick. Instead of having to cache all of that geometry and use up that precious disk space. So just a little trick of the trade here. And then what I actually like to do is I throw in one more file cache node here, and I export out, if I say uncheck time dependent cache, I'll name it operator, and I will call this RBD geo and make that red. And then this, I'm literally just saving out one frame. So I'll hit save to disk. And the reason I do that is because it takes a minute to calculate the fracture. So if you calculate the fracture beforehand as a still image, and then pipe that into the system, we now have that still cached geometry feeding into our actual simulation and into our transform pieces. So now we're driving even faster, right? It's much lighter now because we are reading from our cached files. Okay, so just a little trick of the trade there. So you can see our entire cache is we're just zooming here. Okay, don't have any problems. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you why these groups are important. Okay, these groups that we were talking about earlier. Well, actually, real quick, let me back up. The reason why we wanted to cache these points is because, and you might be wondering, how in the world is this seeing this geometry here and able to like still connect and collide with these other objects? It doesn't make any sense. Well, I'll tell you why. And this is something that you want to be aware of moving forward if you're going to do anything in Houdini, the geometry spreadsheet. This is where the magic happens, okay? If I go to my simulation, you see all this stuff here, okay? All this stuff inside of my simulation. We cache the points, but each of these points, okay, if I click here, you can see that we are able to view all of the points that we cached, okay? And we can even view, not their normal, we can view their velocity. These little tabs here help you view things. I can view the point numbers. There's so many things you can do. But if we view our points and our point velocity, okay, we can see how our points are moving. These points aren't just points. They hold all of the information that we need for our simulation. So if I go into my geometry spreadsheet and I go to one, you see the orientation, which is what Houdini calls rotation as far as its attributes go. Our orientation is 0. The position of each point is different, and that's because it's broken up from the start. So these don't start changing until we start going through our sim, and each of those points holds point information, holds rotation information, it holds velocity information, it holds the scale information, so many things in just those points themselves. That's why we don't need all of this geometry. We only need the points. So it's very, very light and easy to manipulate and maneuver around in situations like this with Houdini, because you get a lot of bang for your buck when you can find little. It's not a workaround. It's just a workflow. It's just a more efficient way of going through this type of workflow with an RBD sim. So this cache right here, we get all of our point attributes, and then this cache holds all of our group attributes. And when we connect the two, we get all of our point and group information back in one node that we had in the sim here. So just something to think about. You could literally just put down these 4 nodes, cache out the whole thing, and call it a day. Wouldn't be the most efficient, but if that's what you want to do, by all means, knock yourself out. If you got the disk space for it, go for it. But this is just a way that I learned how to do it, and it's been a huge lifesaver in actual production workflow environment. So, all right, so we have our groups here, okay, and what we want to do is all we really need is this inside group and this outside group. What these are, think of these like selection sets inside of Cinema 4D. This is a selection set for all of the inside pieces, all right, all the inside information, and this is the selection set for the outside. So I can show you, we can visualize that. If I go to just regular exploded view, that'll show me there's RBD exploded view, and then there's exploded view. This just shows you this is a non-RBD based way to view your geometry. So we've already done our RBD sim, so we don't really need the RBD exploded view. So in here, I will show you why those groups are important. So I'm going to add a color node, and I'm going to connect. Let's see, actually, I don't need to move it off the side. I'm going to connect this color here. And actually, here's what we need to do. My bad. Add the color first, and I'll show you why that's important. Add the color first. I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to change this color to green. you can see that the whole thing changes to green, okay? If I go in here and I look at the inside, we have our inside group, right? It's applied to 765,000 primitives, okay? Remember, keep that in mind. It's primitives. I go up here and I select from this selection set the group inside, okay? Nothing happens. It's because what we need to do, one, is we need to flag our actual color group, okay? Two, if I move forward in the sim, you'll be able to see that it's applying it, but we got some kind of this weird artifacting, right? Well, if you're wondering why that is, again, as I was saying before, that these are primitive groups, and this color node automatically applies as a point group, so a point class. So we want to change this to primitives, and now we're getting our expected result. So this is why the groups are important, and this is why our different point, primitive, vertice, and polygon classes are important as well. So if I want to color the outside, what do? Do the same thing. I can just click and hold Alt and I click off and drag, it'll duplicate a selected node. So I can go in here just for the sake of seeing what's going on. I'll change this to orange, and it change the inside because we still have inside selected here. So if I delete that and I go to outside, we now have our outside colored as well because it's reading downstream, right? So it sees our green and then it says, oh, he wants to add another color on top of that. And so we just keep exponentially adding as we go downstream here. And if I go to the exploded view, you can see all of our pieces here. This is our very first frame. All of our pieces here have the information on them that we want. Now, if we wanted to get very, very detailed, these different other groups here, these are for those smaller pieces. They're for more of the medium-sized pieces. So if we wanted to make this literally just in here, I'll do this. I'll do exploded view just on the inside. If we wanted to make this inside piece like be very specific, we can go to the color and we can delete the whole inside group, and we would just do, let's see, this fracture 3 inside. So it only does certain ones, specific ones, right? So you can get as detailed as you want, but we don't need all that information. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete that. We're going to change this to white, or like a gray, for our outside. So we'll label these inside, and we'll label this outside. And what we're going to do before these nodes, again, if I click on this, we've got all of our groups. I'm going to add what's called a group delete. I'm going to do a little bit of house cleaning here, okay? Because we don't need all of that information when we kick out our limbic. Otherwise, it's just going to, again, take up space that we don't necessarily need to take up. So if I go into this group delete node, I'll go in here and I will actually here. If you add an asterisk, that gets rid of everything. That says, okay, anything in here is going to be included in this particular item here. So in this case, it's saying, all right, he put an asterisk. That means he wants all the groups to be deleted because this is a group delete node. So if I hover over this, all our groups are gone. Well, we don't want all of our groups deleted. We only want the inside and the outside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit space. I'm going to add inside, and I'm going to hit space, and I'm going to hit outside. Okay, so you can see that they're selected here. You can see that they're selected here. I'm just going to click delete unused groups, and we still don't see it. Even if I check delete unused groups, uncheck that. I just do this because if there aren't any groups that aren't being used, we don't need to have that anyway, right? So it's just an extra step of house cleaning. Well, we have our inside and outside group selected here. Why is it not showing up? Well, there's a little thing you got to do to add a group back in, even if you have it selected here, is you have to do the little up caret. I don't know what the official name for that is, but if you add the little up caret before those groups, it'll say, okay, he wants to delete everything except these groups listed here. So now if we click, we get inside and outside. And you probably saw our color change over here. So we have inside, Oh, I need to change that to our regular inside. There we go. And then we have our outside. We double check our groups. We're good there. So again, if I don't have this little up caret, it's not going to add those in. So just something to be aware of as you're going through and adding this stuff in and trying to tidy up a little bit. But now we have our groups added. We have our position data. We have our velocity data. CD is what Houdini calls colored data, okay? We have our color information, and we have our name information, which is the name of those pieces, of those primitives. And then we have our normal, okay? And then we have the inside and outside groups. Perfect. We are all set up, and we're ready to go. So if you followed along with me up to this point, we have started with a box, and we've gone all the way through, and we've created this really cool, super simple simulation, and we have our color information on there. Now what? How do we get it into Cinema 4D and Blender? Well, here's what we do. At the end of every geometry stream, a SOP stream, whenever you're at a point when you have something that you want to save to either bring into another geometry stream or to kick out, what you do is you create a null. Okay, so I'm gonna hit tab, I'm gonna create a null, I'm gonna hit shift enter, and that, oh, my bad, I had that selected. Here, tab, null, shift enter, and we have our null here. And what I do, I like to make my nulls yellow, and if you hit Z, watch over here, so C is for color. If I hit Z, it brings up these different shapes. So you can make it whatever shape you want, which is really cool. But for these nulls, what I like to do is I like to make them circles. That's just me. And a good bit of housekeeping and cleaning, and especially if any other Houdini artist gets your file, they will appreciate this. Anything that you're kicking out or the final node in the geometry stream or your node stream, you want to label that with out. Okay. And I'm going to do out RBD _ sim. And the reason for that is if you're bringing this in or importing it into another geometry stream, it'll make it a lot easier. I'll show you what I mean. Oh, and by the way, if you want to change this, you don't want to see all of the wireframe, all of your settings are up here. You just go to smooth shaded and you don't see that anymore. And if I hit up, we now have our whole entire geometry stream here. So if I hit this flag to turn it off, we can see that this houses our entire node setup that we have here, right? So what I mean by this out RBD sim is if I create another geometry node and I go in here, if I go and add what's called an object merge, I can literally merge other objects from other geometry streams or node streams, node setups into here. So I can bring our entire simulation that we just made into here. And usually you'll do this if you render. So if this is our sim, this is how I would normally set it up. I would create this and I would call this the sim, and actually I would say sim effects. And then I would call this RBD sim. This is extra. Hopefully this doesn't overwhelm you, but this is just a little bit of extra workflow tidbits here. RBD sim, and I would name this render, and I would make that yellow, and I would turn this off, and then in here I would do an object merge. And the reason why you want to label that other node out is because if I go into here and I go into our original RBD sim effect node, we can see right here, boom, out. If I select this, this is going to bring in everything that is connected up above that point. So if I hit accept, this brings in our entire simulation, right? So this essentially is what I would render. So the reason why a lot of Houdini artists do that is because if you change anything in here or update anything, it's just a lot easier and cleaner to just say, okay, I know this is what I'm going to be rendering, because if you look here, each of these has different parameters on here, and especially if you're using Redshift, you have different parameters, objects, instancing, pack primitives, all that stuff, things that we're not going to get into today. But you can set this particular geometry up, or this geometry node up for rendering, and then you can leave this one just for the effects. So just something to note, but we're not necessarily going to worry about that right now or today. We will leave things as is, and we will kick this out from inside of this geometry stream. So now we are at the end of our simulation. Okay, so we've got everything set up. We've got our simulation cached. We have, if you middle mouse over here, we have our information that we need here. Got rid of the information that we don't need. And now we're good to go, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick out an alembic of this. So if I go to, if I type in ROP and create a ROP alembic output and hit enter and connect this, this is our final output node that will kick out the alembic cache for us. Okay. So if I go here, this hip here, this means that it's this directory. Okay. So this is my hip file. And this means that it's going to just put this file right in here. We don't want that. We want it to go inside of this ABC folder, this alembic folder. Okay. And that's standard. That's the standard Houdini folder. If it's not there, don't worry about it. All you have to do is just type ABC and add in the directory here, and it'll automatically create, if you have this checked right here, which is checked by default, create intermediate directories. That's all you need to worry about, because it will create that folder, and if it's already there, it'll just recognize that it's there and put it where it needs to go. So I'm going to change this to $OS, and what we were talking about before, if I change that to $OS, that's telling it to look at this node name and use that node's name for this file. So I like to do that because that way I can see what the actual output file is on my node itself. So I'm going to change this to RBD sim effects v001. And if I change this, we don't want just one frame. We want the whole sequence. So I say render frame range. It's again set to start and end 1 to 120, and we are good to go. Now, if this throws you off, all you got to do is think about this like it's a token, right? Like a C4D token that you add. If you use tokens at all, I use them all the time in Cinema. It just helps streamline your process. Okay. So in here, I'm going to turn on, if I go to motion blur, I'm going to turn on, actually, I don't need to do that for this. You have to do that for proxies. I take that back. You don't need to worry about it for this. So with that said, we're all set. So all we got to do is hit save to disk, and it's going to chomp away at that, kick it out, frame 1 to 120. And we now, if we go into here, we now have our alembic simulation. You see it's 578 megabytes. And it's about half a gig, and we're good to go. So if I want to check it, I can create another geometry stream and say geo, right? And I'll just name this check, right? And turn that off so we don't get confused. So if I go into check, I go in here and I just type in alembic, right? This is what we will use to read alembics that are outside of Houdini. I can find it through this file system here. Or I can just go to my file here that I saved out and click and drag it. But just so you guys can see that it updates here on the left, I will click the file, hit accept, and we now have our alembic. And we have all of our information there. And if you see, we have our point and our path. Now, this is just because, I'm not going to dive into this right now, but it's because of how it's reading it right now. I can unpack this and get all of the information that I had back, but I'm not going to go into that right now. That's outside of the scope of this video. One last thing we need to do, we need to add UVs in here and re-export, because if we don't add UVs in, we're going to be up the creek. If we add a triplanar texture to our sim here and think it's going to work, it's not. It's going to slip all over the place. It's going to be popping because it's just going to be projecting on whatever axis that it can. And with this thing, moving around all over the place, it's not going to work. So we need to add in here, right after the box node, we need to add a UV unwrap. And we'll throw that in there, and we'll bring we can view that by, if I flag this, And I'll just go to match axis so we can see it a little better. And if I select our UV unwrap and scale it down, spacing of 0, and make sure by default it's at a plane, it has set to 6 planes. That's totally fine for what we need. So right now this is UVing the outside. And what we need to do is go down here. If I click on this, we've already cached this out. So we need to recache this with our UV added to this. So I'm going to hit save to disk because we already have everything set up. And now you see that it's cached with our UV information. Now, the other place that we need to add the UV unwrap in is for the inside group, because if we move forward in our simulation, you see that we don't have proper UVs on the inside, and it's not going to work. So what we need to do is we need to add a UV unwrap down here. And we need to use the groups, utilize the groups that we have, and we need to add it to the inside so that it knows we're trying to unwrap only the inside. So group, inside, and we'll set this to 0. And so now we have UVs for the inside of our mesh, because again, remember, this is just a still, basically a single frame of our geometry. So now that we have that added, go down here and kick out the Olympic again, and then we will jump over to Cinema and bring this in. Okay, so here we are in Cinema, and I'm going to bring in my RBD sim that we did. So we just click and drag. One thing to note is the scale factor. That's something that's very important. It's going to start, by default, it's going to be 1. It's a scale factor of about 100. So you want to bring it in. I know it sounds crazy, but you want to bring it in by a scale of 100, because if you don't, and I would just leave it at 1, it looks fine, but it's super tiny. Okay. If I create a box as regular, just as reference for Cinema 4D scale, it's tiny. Okay. So what I want to do is import that alembic as a scale factor, at a scale factor of 100. And now we are at a better scale for Cinema 4D. Okay. So just something to keep in mind. Doesn't do that in Blender. Cinema 4D scale is very weird. Houdini, dealing with scale in Houdini is incredibly important. So that's just something that we want to be consistent in. So if I look here, I have, if I go to my project settings, Control D, we have 24 frames per second. That's just how I have my scene set up as default. And if I scroll through my timeline, we have our simulation. How cool is that? And look at this. If I go over here, these selection tags, look at that. Inside and outside. These are the groups that we were maintaining inside of Houdini, and I can now add materials to those groups. So if I create a new, let's just do a quick little setup here, and I apply that to my sim and that selection tag, we now have our green material. And I'll duplicate this and just call this green, and we'll call this white, or we'll just do gray, and change this one to gray, because nothing is pure white, right? And I change that to the outside. We now have our object set up here. I'm going to create a plane just for the sake of having something to ground our simulation. And now if I add a dome light, normally I would group all these, but we're just doing this really quick just to show that our simulation is indeed working. I'm going to add in an HDRI. I'm turning off the backplate there. We turn off our backplate and I hit play through our IPR. We are now getting our, let me stop this down because that's actually pretty hot out of the gate. Go to 2, go to 1. So we're now getting the same information that we had in Houdini, and it's updating super smooth. And we can now use the power of Cinema 4D to assemble our scene, to texture the geo that we need to texture, and kick out the render that we need to kick out from there. Okay. Oh, actually, it helps if I add Redshift in here. I already have a Redshift preset. There we go. So this is really cool, okay, because it opens up a door to so many things. Again, Houdini is being used as a tool, right? So you can see the possibility for how this is a huge potential to create so many cool things. Now, let's do the same thing, but I want to set it up in Blender to show you guys how that's set up. So let's jump over to Blender real quick and do the same thing. All right, so here we are in Blender, and I'm going to do the same thing that we did in Cinema. I don't have my quick import set for Alembic, so I'm going to import Alembic here, ABC, and I don't know why, again, our scaling for Blender is going to stay as default. I don't know why Cinema 4D's scaling is so off. It's a bit of an odd duck in that regard. But regardless, we are going to keep this at a scaling of 1. Import that bad boy, and we have our simulation. And we know that the scaling is correct because if we create a simple primitive here, we can see that this is the same scaling that we had inside of Cinema. So that's working. And what I'm going to do is just check a few things here. I'm going to bring this over, and in our settings, project settings, I'm going to be using cycles, and we have our frame rate is set to 24. Okay. So if I click on our object here, let me change this to shader editor. If I click on our object, we can see in our material settings, look at that. We have our inside and our outside materials that Blender automatically creates for us when we import based on the groups that we had in Houdini. So we're going to do the same thing. Go into here. I'm going to change this to green. And then I'm going to change this to white. Or like a gray, right? We're going to do a little bit of an off gray. Actually, that was it, gray. And we'll leave that. And it's not showing up because I need to see my material view. And now we're getting the same result here, right? So we've got our setup, and you can use, again, at this point, we've got all the information we need. We can now set up our scenes like we normally would to render and kick out and use Blender as our assembly tool here. And let me just go ahead and add in the same thing that we did for Cinema 4D. I'm going to add in an HDRI, environment texture, and in here, I'm going to use the same one that I used before, Shanghai Riverside. I just like, it's a good, like, quick little look dev one to just check things. And now I'm going to add in a plane here, scale that up. And if we just look through our render view, so Shift Z, and we can now see, scale that back up. We can now see that it is working as expected. So here, let me turn off that HDRI. Go to film and transparent. There we go. Just so it doesn't distract us. So we have our RBD sim inside of Blender from Houdini working properly. We've got the materials applied, and we've got everything working as expected. So just really cool to be able to do that and to get the results that we want inside of a tool like Houdini, and to be able to iterate quickly. Because if I change something in Houdini and I realize I want to update something, all I have to do is just go back to Houdini, kick that sim out as a different version. I can version up, and then literally all I have to do is just either re-import or just update the path to the Alembic, and Bob's your uncle. We're good to go. So that is how you would apply these to the workflow of using Cinema 4D or Blender as an output tool. And doing it that way is really helpful because if you're not used to kicking things out from Houdini, obviously that's going to be a bit of a process and an entirely separate video than this one. But bringing it into Cinema 4D or Blender, where you are used to using your native tools, only adds Houdini to your tool set as a huge benefit to being able to get the results you want. So that's where I'm going to leave it today. Hopefully you guys will be able to use this stuff and hopefully we're able to follow along, and hopefully this opens up a whole new world to you guys and shows you that Houdini is not as scary as it may seem. I'm going to leave it there. We'll catch you guys on the next one.
I know it was a little bit of a lengthy video, so if you made it this far, congratulations, you earn a gold star. I don't know where you live, can't send it to you, but just know that you earn a gold star by watching this whole video. If you are interested in learning some tips and tricks about lighting, you can check out my other video here, and hopefully that'll be able to help you guys as well when you're kicking this stuff out. From Cinema 4D or Blender. It's applicable across the board, so be sure to check that out. Aside from that, be sure, if you guys aren't already, be sure to subscribe, boop that notification bell, hit the ding dong, and so you can get all the notifications and all the YouTube stuff. That's where we're gonna leave it for today. We'll catch you guys on the next one. As always, work hard, stay humble.